listening to The Loop, a podcast by Mosaic Church. The goal? To know Jesus a little better so we can live like him a little more. And now, here's today's host, Wes Feldner.
Welcome back to a brand new episode of The Loop. It has been a while since we've done one of these episodes, but thanks so much for tuning in today. If you're watching with us, not just listening, you probably look around and say, hey, the background has changed quite a bit. Well, that's because we recently relocated our podcast studio, and we're still getting things together here, but we're just thankful to be able to pull together a shoot today. We recently started a new study in the book of James, and we're kicked off a brand new series called Life is Hard. We brought some friends into the studio today to share a little bit about their story. So let's welcome today Reggie and Kathie Broom. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today in this special episode of The Loop. Now, Reggie, I know that some people are going to know a little bit about your story and know what happened, but there are a lot of folks that are listening and watching today that maybe have no idea who you are and what happened. So I just want you to take some time right here off the bat to kind of share what happened that morning in 2018 when you went for your run.
Yeah, I love to run, and it was November 29th, 2018, just a few days after Thanksgiving, and I was training for a marathon and went out for a run with a friend and was running along Front Beach here in Ocean Springs, and a truck pulling a boat came along and hit me, and I sustained a traumatic brain injury.
Wow.
And broke a few bones in my skull and damaged my eustachian tube and was unconscious, of course. And as a result of the trauma and the nature of the trauma, the Ocean Springs emergency room felt it best to have me airlifted over to the University of South Alabama. And I was treated there in the hospital for about a week, spent a few days in the ICU there, and then returned home and began to work with a home therapist and a physical therapist who realized that because of my balance issues that I needed the help of a vestibular therapist as well.
Yeah.
And then also hired a personal trainer at the local Y to help me. And I basically had to learn to re-walk again. And I did that in our home by holding Kathie's hand here, walking up and down the hall for quite a while, until I was able to let go and walk unassisted by her with a cane, and began to practice that on my own, and eventually was able to later return to running again and back to work again after a little over 3 months.
Wow. Kathie, what can you recall your part of the story? Obviously, he was out running. And tell us.
I was asleep.
Yeah,
I love to run early.
tell us your account of the story.
Well, briefly, I got a phone call that awakened me from someone at the Y who knew somebody that was running with Reggie, and they just told me they had taken him to the ER. And I said, "Well, is he okay?" And they just said, "Well, he's mumbling." So
gotcha.
I knew he was alive,
Yeah.
you know. And so I went on to the ER, and then, as Reggie said, they felt that it was a serious enough injury that he needed to be airlifted.
Needed to be somewhere else, yeah.
But Brandon made it up to the hospital, and several other people from church before we left. And I just remember telling Brandon that all I kept saying over and over was, God's promises are real. It was just so real to me that God was right there with us the whole entire time.
Wow.
So it's kind of a blur when you think back about it, but in looking back, you can see how God really did orchestrate a lot to get us where we needed to be.
That's amazing. Reggie, you talked a little bit about your recovery time. Like, how much time are we talking? Like, how long was the rehab and all of that stuff? Like, how long were you at home and working until you actually felt like things kind of got back to normal?
I don't know that they'll ever be back to normal. So that's my response to that. But it did. I was out of work for a little over 3 months.
Yeah.
And it took a few weeks to be able to walk unassisted with Kathie's help.
Yeah.
And, a few more weeks after that until I was able to run again. But I still deal with some things today.
Right.
And so when people say returning back to normal, I say I want to be better than normal.
Better than normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he says return to running, that was me driving the car very slowly behind him as he ran in front of me.
Yeah.
So it was a very
That's a great.
That's how we started with
Yeah.
that, because Kathie was, of course, very anxious about me to go running again. But in some ways, it was easier to run than it was to walk.
Gotcha.
Because I had the momentum of
Yeah.
my weight behind me. But we started running on Lover's Lane.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Dead end street, no traffic,
Yep.
but some vicious blind curves there. And Kathie was a bit nervous about that, so
Yeah.
she would get in front of me, and I had some water in the car, and I would be close to the rear bumper
Wow, that's
and
great.
run very slowly up and down Lover's Lane
Wow.
until I could have her blessing to go out on my own again.
Yeah. Did you get to run that marathon that you were training for? Did you run that one? I mean, not that specific
Not
one,
that
obviously.
one. Wasn't able to run that one, but I ran one the following year. And the one that I was supposed to run, I called the race director and said, I'm not going to be able to run it, but I want the shirt.
Yeah.
So
You got the
please
T-shirt.
send me the shirt.
That's
so
the most
I can,
important part.
I can remember, but I was able to return to running again and was able to qualify for Boston again.
That's awesome.
Wasn't able to run it, but because of an injury, but I did qualify.
You did
for
qualify.
it again.
That's important. That's the important part. Man, that's incredible. So obviously we're in this book study on the book of James, and I've got some excerpts here from the book of James that I've got some questions that we've got nested in there with scripture, and I'd love to be able to kind of weave a story that works really well with the content of where we're at in this study. So James says to consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kind. Now, everybody that's listening to this episode would say, wow, this is a crazy trial that you experience. And I imagine that it's probably hard for both of you guys to consider or to find joy in the experience itself. But when you look back, several years removed, when you look back on what happened, can you identify anything to be joyful about because of that experience or because of what happened?
Yeah. I'm so grateful that we serve a God in whose image we were created. And when I think about that, and I think about the life of Christ here on earth, he was filled with a variety of different emotions. He was all laughter when he was surrounded by children. He grieved the loss of his friend Lazarus.
Right.
He agonized in the garden over the thought of the cross before him. And I think it would be unrealistic for us to be a void of emotion when we experience something like I did. But I think about what we later told about his agonizing over the cross in Hebrews, and it was that for the joy set before him, Christ endured the cross. And that's what I think about when I have a question like that. There's a song that I listen to every day that I ran on my playlist, and it was I'm Thankful for the Scars. And it goes like, the chorus goes like this: I'm thankful for the scars because without them, I wouldn't know who you are.
Yeah.
And I know that they will forever tell of your heart. And so forever, I'm thankful for the scars.
Wow.
So while I'm thankful for his scars, which were much greater than mine, when I look back, I'm also thankful for mine.
Wow.
Because in my life, they do tell of who he is.
That's
and
absolutely
who he
true.
was to me. Because there were so many moments I was trying to figure out who I was and what I was thinking and why I was feeling the things I was feeling. Because when you have a traumatic brain injury, it does have a great deal of impact upon your emotions. And the thing that I am joyful about is, as Kathie said, his promises are true, but he is true to who he says he was and who he says he is in our lives. And I found that sometimes walking up and down the streets of my neighborhood well before sunrise, saying, God, I don't understand this. I don't know why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. I don't know why I'm thinking what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
But I thank you that you love me and that you are always here. And your unconditional love for me will never change, and that is enough. And so when you compare it to all of these things, so many things that we strive after, and we want to get back to this, and we want to get back to that, and we want to return to normal, what's the true win in all of that is that he loves us unconditionally, and he's never going anywhere.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible. Kathie, I'm going to give you a break, Reggie. I'm going to ask Kathie this question, but I'm going to come back to you because I'd like to hear from both of you. So James talks about the testing of our faith that produces perseverance. So how did this experience test your faith and produce perseverance in your life?
I think a big test of faith is just like we've been talking about, when the rug does get pulled out from under you. Who are you looking to?
Yeah.
You know, what are you trying to invest in, and what are you trying to prioritize in your life? And I think for Reggie and me both, we both have not ordinary testimonies, but we both grew up in church. Our families were all believers. We came to know Christ at a very early age, and so our testimony is not very dramatic, you know,
Right.
up until that point.
Until that point.
Yeah, right.
Very
right.
dramatic now.
Exactly. But, I mean, we had other things in our life for trials. We had a house fire when our 5 kids were really small.
Oh,
we,
wow.
you know, flooded in Katrina like so many other people did. But
Yeah.
things that really remind you that stuff is just stuff, and,
Yeah.
and the things in life that we think are so important are not. And so I think it just teaches you that the main things in life are truly God, His Word, and people.
Yeah.
And to persevere through hard times just reminds you over and over and over what really matters,
Yeah.
you know. And just even in the hospital, when we were in the ICU, the nurses were so kind to us and just went above and beyond. I think we were supposed to see him for 20 minutes every 4 hours. And basically his room was a curtain around a bed,
Right.
very, very small space. And they let me and all 5 of our children stay in that room
Oh, wow.
24 hours a day. And it was just small things like that
Yeah.
that really, I felt like God was just touching us with gentle blessings all throughout the recovery period.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Reggie, same question.
Yeah. I'm a very disciplined individual. Saying that in a nice way, maybe a more accurate way, is stubborn.
Yeah.
I just continue to put my nose down and persevere. And I can remember the very first time that I had a quiet time and prayer time after my injury. I can remember sitting there and saying, God, what I've done in the past to get through times like this is not going to work anymore.
Gotcha.
I can't just put my head down and keep at it.
Right.
But yet I found myself doing that. I worked with all of these therapists. I started adding a bunch of exercises that I was trying to do myself. I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and doing this before I had to go to work, and
Right.
sometimes getting finished with work and coming and doing it. Went to see a counselor that helped me realize that, hey, this is not the right approach. He said, you're measuring your recovery by numbers on a watch.
Gotcha.
You're trying to hit a pace, you're trying to hit a distance, and that's not how this is going to work. And I thought, God, I knew this earlier, but here I've fallen into what has always worked in
Right.
the past. And I just realized that, you know, what's going to get me through this is my relationship with you, my trust in you, my dependence upon you. And my prayer as I walked through the neighborhoods in the morning was, God, I want to love you more than I ever have.
Yeah.
And I want you to draw me to you in a deeper way than you ever have, because I know that this is the answer. This is the way that I get through this, is with you by my side and us loving each other.
That's so good. That's so good. All right, so here's the next question, and I'll stick with you, Reggie, and then we'll maybe have you add something here, Kathie. So James says that trials can make us mature and complete so that we are not lacking anything. So how did God use this experience to further mature you and develop your faith?
I just started thinking about the things that I had to be thankful for. And I think those two go along in Scripture quite often. When we have trials, a lot of times we start thinking about what we've lost or what we are upset about. And, and the answer to that is thanksgiving. And I just began to think about that. I think about the fact that I was able to live another day and enjoy each day after that, that I had a wife that loved me through this process, that I had children that cared about what was going on and was there for me and loved me. And then I began to empathize with other people that had experienced difficulties as well. It's something that when you go through a situation like I did, it makes you much more empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate to others. And so relationships became very important to me.
Yeah.
I began to open up about what had happened to me, the struggles that I'd had, and other people as a result began to tell me what was going on in their lives. And it meant a lot to me. I wanted to help any way that I could. And so it was those things, I think, the gift of life, the gift of friendships and relationships, of a wonderful wife, and a God who was sticking by my side.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, Kathie, when this all happened, you said that you were at the hospital there when Brandon was there, and you were saying God's promises are good. You were holding strong to those. How did God use this? Because, I mean, I feel like your faith was already strong to begin with, but how did God use this experience in your life to deepen and grow your faith?
Well, I think so much of and I've talked to some of our ladies' Bible studies that I've met with in the past, that if you haven't already experienced trials in your life, they're coming. Mm-hmm. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but they're going to come in one shape or another. And I think that's one reason when the times do seem easy, that instead of kind of relaxing, we need to be using all that time to build up our faith in Christ and to study the Word and to know the Scriptures and to go through, as I mentioned, the trauma, and God's promises just start going through your head, and knowing that that's really from the study that you've done in God's Word.
Yeah.
And I think being able to recall that, and like Reggie mentioned, gratitude is just absolutely where it's at as far as learning how to manage the valleys of life, is to be grateful for what you have, and that you have a God who is going to walk through it with you, and other people in your life that help you through it.
Yeah. Wow. One other excerpt here from James. So James says, if you lack wisdom in the midst of trials, you should ask God, because he gives wisdom to all generously. Now, I'm sure that as you guys were going through all of this, there were probably moments where you felt like you didn't have the answers. But how did you find the wisdom that you needed to work through this particular season in your life?
Yeah, there was a time there we didn't feel like anybody had the answers.
Yes, absolutely.
Certainly.
Not anybody on earth, anyway.
Yeah.
Certainly not us. I had some wonderful medical professionals
Yeah.
that took incredible care of me. When it came time to deal with the emotional, psychological
Gotcha.
impacts of that, we struggled to find someone. I was reading a book by Scott Sauls, who's a very well-known author, and he had mentioned he had found a trauma counselor that had helped him with some things in his life. And I sent him a direct message via Instagram, and I said, you don't know me from anybody, Scott. I enjoy your books, but do you mind sharing me the name of your counselor? It was a young man in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that helped Kathie and me process what was going on as a result of the trauma that I had sustained.
Yeah.
He was excellent in regard to traumatic brain injuries.
Mm-hmm.
We made a couple of trips up to Murfreesboro and talked with him, and he was able to help us understand some things that we did not really have a grip on. And Kathie had also recommended a book by Beth Moore on Audible. Her husband dealt with post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah.
I was running along the beach one day at the climax, really, of the book, where she was talking about her husband and how she was asking God why this had happened to him. And she said, it is not his fault. And I tend to blame myself for things.
Sure.
And I was thinking, what have I done? What do I need to do? And I look up, and it's right about the spot that the truck hit me. And sometimes I think that in the place of our greatest trauma, sometimes God comes through with his greatest revelation.
Wow.
And that's the way that it was for me, is that I haven't done anything. But God, it happened. It's part of life. It's this broken world that we live in. And things are going to happen. As Kathie says, we're going to experience difficulties. But when we do, there is a God that goes before us and comes alongside of us, that is going to continue to love us through it and make us better people than we were to begin with as a result of what we've gone through.
Wow, that's awesome. Kathie, anything to add?
Well, I think just, and I know Reggie would say this too, and God does give you wisdom, but it's not like we've arrived yet. You know, there's still things, just like he said, and that's one. And it's funny that you used the word normal, because that was so many times people would see him, he's gone to work. Oh, you're back to normal. Oh, you're back to normal. And he didn't go into detail, but in his mind he's thinking, oh, if you only knew how not normal I am right now. Yeah. But so many times, I think we expect to know everything this side of heaven, and we're just not. We're not going to understand everything. But God has brought us so far, and it's just like over and over and over, he's put people in our lives to minister to us and to teach us things we need to know. And I think so many of the things we've learned obviously they've helped us, but it's like it comes up in conversation with other people because everybody's got their trial.
Yep.
Everybody's got their struggle. It doesn't look like ours. Theirs doesn't look like ours. So many times people's struggles are very, very private, and you don't know what their struggle is, but you can see in their eyes that they're struggling.
Some kind of struggle.
They are. Yeah. And so I think these things, when we walk through them with Christ and when we count on God's promises, it really does help you reach out to other people when they're going through whatever it is. And like I said, we certainly still haven't learned everything we need to learn, and it's probably we're going to keep learning it until we're not here anymore. But the wonderful thing about it, just like I started out with, is just the reassurance over and over and over that what God says in His Word is true.
Yeah.
And if He promises us something, He's going to come through. We may not see it on the same time frame that we want to see it in, but He's going to come through and make His promises true.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. So it's I'm reading between the lines a little bit. So like you said, that everybody's going to face some sort of trial or hardship. Yes. And it doesn't really matter how long it takes to get through it. It really, what's important is who you get through it with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. So like you said, not everybody's story is going to be the same. Obviously, nobody's story is going to be the same as yours.
I hope not exactly like Reggie.
Absolutely. But folks are experiencing their own hardships, and to them, that's all that they can see.
Yes.
And to them, it's like, my world is falling apart.
Yes.
That the rug is being pulled out, like you
Yes.
said earlier, and so that's really all that they can see. They're just consumed with that. So I guess my last question is, what would you say? Because we've said a lot of great stuff, but what would you say to folks that are maybe experiencing their own kind of hardship, kind of just like, hey, this is going to be my final word. Like, what is it that you want to say to folks that are watching this episode or listening to this episode as they're seeing their world fall apart, the rug is being pulled out from under them? It's like everything is coming apart at the seams. What do you say to those guys?
Elizabeth Elliot was a missionary to the Auca Indians along with her husband, Jim. Mm-hmm. And he was speared to death by the Indians. Mm. And somebody asked her, how did you do that? How did you get along? What did you do? She said, I just did the next thing. The next thing is getting up that morning and just asking God to help you through the day, to spend time in His Word, to spend time in conversation with Him through prayer, and just taking it one step at a time, and to know that He is there and that He cares and that He loves you and that He will indeed get you through that. And a trial that someone goes through, it doesn't have to be hitting by a truck with a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
It can be some other thing that seems to be smaller than that, but it can also be something that's greater than that. But whatever it is a trial that can shake your foundation of faith. And I think that's the thing, and that's what got me through, was just quit trying so hard to do it yourself.
Yeah.
But let God love you through this and continue the relationship with Him. And I look at Psalms and I think about David. We're told, man after God's own heart. Psalms is just a compilation of these excerpts from David of when he is crying out to God for one reason or the other. And so I think sometimes we want to try to fix it immediately. We want to understand it completely. And we probably never will do either of those things. Yeah. But I think the importance is the relationship with God, that we continue that relationship. We remember that He does indeed love us and that He is going to walk alongside us through it. I think that's the solution, is walking with Him. I mean, Peter was doing well when he was walking along on the sea with Jesus, but when he looked down and took his eyes off of Christ, he tended to suffer.
Wow. Well, man, thanks so much for being here today and being willing to share part of your story. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that today. I want to remind everybody that's watching and listening to this episode to remember that we've got our weekend services this week. We've got Thursday at 7 o'clock, Sunday at 9 and 10:30, and we are in the middle of this series called Life is Hard. We're all going to have hardships, like we said. It's not going to be exactly the same as yours. Everybody's got their own, but we can all learn together through the book of James how we can find our hope and find our strength and that foundation, like you're saying, Reggie, that'll help carry us through whatever it is that we're facing. So thanks so much for joining us for this episode. We will see you next time on The Loop.